Okay. Does that mean that you're Hi? Does that mean you're coming up here? Okay, good. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. We're in the book of Esther today. And we're going to be talking about the book of Esther. And if you read my message, by mine, I mean the churches, and I posted it, and then Chelsea was like, I'm not sure what you're trying to say here. I was trying to say engaging. Did your mic go out? Is it on? It was unmuted.
It didn't say engaging. It said like EBQ something. Like what are you trying to say here? He was like, so what is the festival or Easter or whatever?
Purim.
Purim. And I'm like, no, that word is spelled correctly.
Yeah.
Some other word that I don't know.
It was a mess. It was something. So we're going to engage with the story of Esther and the Jewish festival of Purim. So let me tell you, I unmuted number 6.
No, you didn't.
Okay.
Okay.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
Except for the people who are watching online, they can't see you. So it's like
Close enough.
the ghost. Anyway, is this what God sounds like?
No.
Oh, it's just Chelsea. Okay. Hey, Chelsea.
I feel a little winded, which is a little sad. But
Hey, what's Purim?
I have no idea. Purim means lots, as in casting lots.
The word is translated lots. Purim is a spring festival in the Jewish calendar. It's not a Levitical celebration. It's actually a celebration that is found in the book of Esther.
Did you say Levitical?
Levitical, yes.
Meaning the book of
Leviticus,
Leviticus.
where God instituted the festivals and the feasts and the celebrations.
Okay.
Not found there.
Okay.
So how long are most of those feasts? Like Feast of Tabernacles, Feast of Weeks?
Aren't they a week?
They're a week. Yeah, most of them are 7 days. Some of them are 10 days, but most of them 7 days.
Yeah.
This is not that. This isn't even a sabbatical fast or a sabbatical, not fast, a sabbatical festival.
Mm-hmm.
So in other festivals in the Jewish calendar, they're sabbaticals. So that means no regular work can be done. In Purim, it's not that way. The Jewish celebration of Purim is typically 1 or 2 days, depending on your division of Judaism. So the people who would have considered themselves connected to the Jews in the same town, in the same area, like within that, then they would celebrate 1 day, and it's the 14th day of Adar, which is the 12th month in the Jewish calendar.
There's a lot of numbers being spoken here.
And in a leap year, the month of Adar, there are 2 months of Adar. So they celebrate it in the 2nd month of Adar. But the Jews that were in fortified cities outside of the main place, they would celebrate it, which would be more like your Hasidic Jews. They end up celebrating 2-day Purim. So they have the 14th and the 15th of Adar.
Yeah, I was thinking that same thing, clear as mud.
And it's like Halloween. Kind of. They dress up.
In scary costumes?
Not scary costumes. Costumes centered around the story of Esther.
So fancy stuff.
Yes, they get dressed up in fancy wear, fancy costumes and robes, and
wow.
They read the story of Esther. And every time they hear the name Haman, which we're going to get to, he's the bad guy in the story, they try to blot him out. And so they will hiss and shout, and like they have these, the little clapper things that you like spin?
Yeah.
They'll use those, and they'll like read the story 4 or 5 times over a 2-day period. The whole story, all at once. And they will let most of the time the kids who are newly bar mitzvahed or bat mitzvahed, they'll be the ones that will read the story or retell the story. They, at that point in time, they should be able to retell this story without scripture, without
reading
it. Yeah. So Purim, it's going to be important because it is the celebration of this happening.
That's kind of neat.
Where would you find in the Old Testament collection of writings? Do you remember the 3 sections?
If you tell me the first one, I'll tell you the second 2.
They call it the Ketuvim, not the Ketuvim, the TaNaKh. TaNaKh. Remember that? What does the T stand for? Big T? Torah. Which would be?
What? I have to say the books?
No. Torah, they would recognize it as the law.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Torah is the law. It's just the first 5 books of the Bible.
Right.
And then the Nevi'im is the...
I said tell me the first one and I would know. And
I gave you 2 of them now. Torah is the law.
Uh-huh.
The Nevi'im is the...
prophets.
Yes.
Oh,
and the
I did remember.
Ketuvim is the...
I don't remember that part.
Writings.
Writings. Okay.
Where would the book of Esther fall? Is it in Torah?
I think it's in the writings.
It's in the writings, yes.
I did read that earlier. I should have known writings.
So the book of Esther is in the Ketuvim. It's in the writings. And the reason we associate it where we're at in the division, the remnant, this would really fall in this remnant time period because all the other writings that we've read in the remnant time period, Ezra, Nehemiah, where are they found? Where are the people found?
In
Haggai is to in where?
Because they were carried off, right? No, they were in the remnant, so they were back home.
They were back home.
Yeah.
Now, the book of Esther is unique because it's written and the story happens in Persia. So this is a writing written to the Jews who chose to stay in Persia.
Okay.
There were about 6 million Jews at the time. When they were given permission to go back home, there were about 6 million Jews. Between the 4 or 5 different groups that came back, only about 250,000 came back to Jerusalem at the time. So that means
there were how many, you said?
6 million.
Oh, that's not a very big number then.
Yeah.
But if you're going back to nothing, I mean, I can't imagine that everybody's just going to sign up and say,
right.
Let me go back
Less
to
than 10% of all Jews at the time came back to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
To rebuild. Because not everybody's made for a fixer-upper. Right?
They're not, no.
So then, if they're not coming back, and it's not Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai's not talking to them, you know, if those books aren't speaking to them, Malachi is not speaking to them because they're not back home, well, what do we do if we're believers who aren't finding our way back to this sacred place, who are living in this land under Persian rule? What do we need to know? And this is the book of Esther. I would like to tell you one unique, very, very unique thing about the writing of the book of Esther. It is the only book, or 2 unique things. It's the only book in the Old Testament not found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's no remnant or partial or quotation or anything of the book of Esther found in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
So does that mean it didn't happen?
No, doesn't mean it didn't happen. It very much did happen, and there's a lot of historical evidence that proves it. But there is a huge debate in academic, in Christian and Jewish academia about the inclusion and canonization of this particular book.
Into
probably
the Bible?
into the Bible at all. Probably the most hotly debated book that's included in our canon of Scripture is this one. Another unique happening in the book of Esther is the name of God is not mentioned at all. God is not directly referenced one time in the book of Esther. He is not called by name.
They never say God's people?
Mm-mm.
Oh, they do in the VeggieTale movie.
Not one time. They don't pray to
It's
God.
one of my favorite VeggieTale
Like
movies.
they fast and pray. It says that. So we get these evidences of God being around, but there is no direct mention of God himself one time in the entire book.
Wonder why that is.
I don't know. Interesting happening though. It's a very unique. Anything else we need to know? Thinking through the backstory, yeah. Correct. They don't name an author. Say what? Yeah, they don't name. It's an anonymous author. They're not certain as to the authorship of the book of Esther, who it came from. Maybe Mordecai wrote it.
I was going to say it feels very... Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like somebody very close to either
Somebody would
Mordecai or
have to
Esther
know,
would
yeah.
have to know, otherwise the details wouldn't be there.
All right, we're going to get to them. Let's jump into the story. Let's talk about what the story is. So some people are like, oh, it's King Artaxerxes. It's not. Ahasuerus is how you say that.
Sounds like a dinosaur.
Ahasuerus. King Ahasuerus. He is the king of all the 127 provinces of Persia. Calls all the leaders. Why it calls them eunuchs, I'm not really sure. Like all of the leaders and people that are his right-hand men are all eunuchs. Very unique. I do not understand.
Very unique.
Yeah. And he
Nobody
calls together all the lords and all the princes of all the 127 regions of Persia. And they have a festival. And they're drinking a lot.
And then the wife doesn't make a sandwich.
To the point that day 7,
right? Isn't that how the story goes?
Party with Kings. That's how it goes. And it's a little different than that.
He could make his own sandwich.
As a matter of fact, at the same time, Queen Vashti is having a celebration and a banquet for the wives and the prominent women.
But not the eunuch wives.
Correct. So they're having this celebration. Ladies over here, guys party over here. Very normal for their time. And King Ahasuerus, man, I struggled with saying that all day. Xerxes. So he starts talking with these guys and is so proud of King Vashti that he summons her to wear her crown and come before the court. Now, what we miss is in the Hebrew, the implication is to come wearing only her crown.
Oh. Well, I would have said
which
no
would
too.
make you a lot more inclined to go, oh, well, that's why she said no. He was extremely proud of her beauty and wanted to look at it in front of everybody. And she said, not gonna do it.
Make your own sandwich. That's what she said.
And so he gets mad, and then he's stuck in a tough position because now he has all these other people, and a courier, a messenger has gone from the king to Vashti in her celebration and her festival that has all the other prominent women in the kingdom. And she has just openly defied the king. And the concern of everybody at the party is, well, if the queen's not going to do what the king says, all these other women are not going to do what they're told to do either.
Right, yeah.
So, king, you better do something about this. So he did. He stripped her of her crown, sent out a letter, and said she can't be queen or hold any royal position anywhere in the Persian kingdom.
Well, it says that the queen's behavior will become known to all women. They will despise their husbands.
Yeah.
In their eyes when they report. Wow.
So she's one. What is it? One rotten tomato ruins a whole bunch, or something like that.
One bad apple?
One bad apple. There you go. I don't know.
Make your own sandwich.
I'll make my own sandwich. I did make my own sandwich before this. Tomato, tomato. Potato, potato.
What?
Yes. So.
Oh, I thought I was supposed to say something. I don't know any more rhymes.
It's done.
I feel like that was a little dramatic on his part.
Well, you got to know these things. You got to know these things when you're a king, you know.
Clearly, I am not a king, so I just don't know these things.
So, Xerxes sobers up.
Realizes what he did was stupid.
Realizes, hey, I should call my queen. And then he's like, wait, I don't have a queen. This is kind of boring. Now, in perspective, she doesn't live at his house. She lives at her own house.
Where her party was?
I don't know. She has her own house, though. Like, they don't. We'll get to that. But they have their own space. This is normal for them. The prominent people, the husband had his space and his servants, and the queen had her space. And it wasn't like husband and wife, the two become one, all this stuff. It was, that's the queen and all the privilege.
Well, clearly it wasn't like that because he just dismissed her.
Oh, yeah, he just stripped her of her, deposed her, done. So, the king says, what am I supposed to do now? And his advisors are like, got a great idea. You're the king. Why don't you find all the beautiful virgins and bring them here? What was the name of the place? It's like a keep, but that's not what it's called.
Shushan? Citadel?
Harem.
Harem? What?
Harem. That's to bring them into the harem. It's at Susa. Susa is the stronghold of Persia. That's the city. But the harem is where they're held. Not quite a dungeon, but kind of like a boarding house collection point of stuff. Yeah.
That's what I thought.
It is going to be. But they're collecting all the virgins. Not yet. So what you're going to see in the story is all the virgins are collected in one place, and they're given to a caretaker, and they're given cosmetics and stuff to make themselves pretty and desirable. Yeah, whatever that means.
You say it's called purification?
They call it purification. What it really is, what the implications of it is they're in training. And they're being trained and prepared for one night with the king. And whoever pleases the king the most in that one night, he's going to call back by name, and she's going to end up being the queen. Everyone else who he doesn't call back by name, that he's not overly pleased with, goes to be in the harem with the concubines.
Because they're used.
Because they're used.
That's terrible.
Probably going to read the book of Esther a little bit different now.
I thought they just got on a wagon.
No, they didn't just get on a wagon and she didn't just sing a song and whatever.
I like the VeggieTale version a little better.
Yeah. Well, even the way we read it in English is
not this awful.
Yeah.
Wow,
So that's what's going on here. Then enters Hadassah.
Hadassah. Oh, there.
Hadassah is Mordecai's brother's daughter.
No,
Yes.
his uncle's daughter. They're cousins. She's not his uncle.
Okay, yes. Hadassah's mother and father are dead.
That is Esther. Esther is Hadassah, right?
Hadassah, yes.
Okay,
But Hadassah is her Jewish name.
gotcha.
Mordecai, who is a guard at the citadel in Susa and serves the king, has raised her as his own daughter.
Okay.
And when they come to collect the beautiful virgin girls, he tells her to use her Persian name.
Okay.
Now, the Persian name Esther is it's not her name. Hadassah and Esther are not the same word. Hadassah in Jewish is not Esther in Persian. But the name Esther in Persian in the Hebrew tongue is Ishtar. And Ishtar, does that sound like anything that you've ever heard before?
No, but your arrow points to Asherah, and that's not
Ishtar is actually the Romans tried to pronounce Ishtar, and they mispronounced it as Easter.
So Esther.
No, Easter.
Easter.
As in Easter Sunday.
Oh, seriously?
Yes.
Oh, that is not the same thing.
Ishtar, the Phoenician word for Ishtar, is Asherah. Do we remember Asherah is a goddess?
Of fertility.
A goddess of fertility. And they would have their festivals. So the goddess of fertility known in this area is Asherah. So Esther now is recognized, and her name would then recognize her as connection to this goddess of fertility. So there's one of two things you can take from this. One, Esther got into this whole happening by sketchy means. Like, she got into this sensual seduction contest to try to gain space, and used a name that would associate her with a goddess, that this is her thing.
Mm-hmm. Or.
And so that is, that really makes you question the whole what's going on here, right? But the beauty of that particular conversation, in my opinion, is that we have all found ourselves in certain places because of poor motives and poor decisions.
Yeah.
But even in spite of that, maybe God is sovereignly at work without us recognizing him at all, to put us in the right place at the right time. Regardless of our motives and our means, that God is still able to redeem that and fulfill his purpose through it. So maybe we need that. Maybe we need to hear that. Maybe we need to know that. Or secondly, that is a very popular opinion, by the way.
I can imagine.
Secondly, a far more accepted, but the far more pursued after and believed idea is that Mordecai encouraged Esther to use the name and was moved into this competition and encouraged and chose to not engage in the sensual manipulation side, but to rather just be herself and to gain favor through her wisdom and understanding and her stories and her knowledge of Torah. And so Jewish historians, they like to lean into this side, that Esther found herself in the presence of Xerxes and found herself in a place where she used her understanding of Torah and her ability to have an intelligent conversation and have an engaging, understanding, shrewd response to what was going on, and be able to make a difference and be different to the king to earn the king's favor. Okay? So, there's a lot going on here. And we're going to read a couple passages here as we kind of lean into this story and continue forward. So far, story, good, bad, messy.
Interesting.
Yes. You have Esther chapter 2, verse 8 through 11.
Yeah. So it was when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at, you said what?
Susa. Gathered in Susa.
Mine says Shushan.
Okay.
So gathered at Susa, the citadel, under the custody of
Haggai,
that Esther also was taken into the king's palace, into the care of Haggai, the custodian of the women. Now the young woman pleased him, Haggai, right?
Haggai, yeah.
And she obtained his favor, so he readily gave beauty preparations to her, besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women.
This says in the harem. Go ahead.
Esther had not revealed her people or her family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her.
Okay. What does that sound like? Have you heard a story where a person ended up in
Joseph?
in a very contained place and immediately gained favor with the people who were in charge and basically became in charge themselves? This is
definitely Joseph.
Yeah. There's so many parallels in this story to Joseph, which would have been reassuring to a Jewish believer who finds themselves in exile and not sure whether they can or can't make it back and are trying to survive in a place that's not their home. That, hey, maybe, just maybe, you're here because God wants to grant you favor and move you to a favorable place, still under that control. Because she was still in the harem.
Right.
She still had to get prepared to go before the king and put her life at his mercy, right? But she still had someone looking out for her, keeping an eye on her, making sure, like, if something was happening to her that wasn't good, what was Mordecai going to do?
Who knows?
What could Mordecai do?
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing. He was helpless. All he could do was no. Right? And so we definitely see this parallel with Joseph. What about, you want to skip ahead to same chapter, chapter 2, verse 15 through 17?
They had a year.
A year.
We're skipping the part where it says they had a year.
Yeah.
To prepare.
They were preparing.
6 months. It says 6 months.
They were learning.
With oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes.
They were learning.
A whole year to prepare to go see the king. That's a long time. I mean, honey,
Don't take that long.
you could put lipstick on a pig. That's all I'm going to say.
But these weren't pigs.
These were not pigs.
They
These
were the most beautiful virgins
according to
of the area.
eunuchs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which,
Well,
okay. Anyway, so chapter 2, 15 through 17.
yeah.
It says, we have to find 15. Now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, to go in to the king, she requested nothing but what Hegai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Xerxes
Yep.
into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of
Tibet.
Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti.
So what happened? What happened when Joseph came before the king and interpreted his dream?
Did he set a crown upon his head?
He was restored, right? He given a signet ring and
Signet ring, that's what it was.
second in command of all,
Which would be like a queen.
which would be where
She finds herself.
she finds herself. Second in command. Everything I have is yours. Here's this crown, headdress of recognition of power. Put robes on her. Best gave her own place out of nothing and servants to serve her. Later on, he's going to say, hey, I love you so much. You can ask me anything up to half my kingdom and it's yours. It's pretty good power and influence, grace and favor, right? But what's that grace and favor for?
Well, I'm sure we're going to find out.
What's the benefit of it?
Right.
Why is this something that we should care about? Enter Haman. Next thing that happens is we're introduced to Haman, the king's right-hand man. If anybody has more influence in the kingdom than the queen, besides King Xerxes, it's Haman. Haman was so empowered and so full of himself that the king gave a declaration that everybody except for the king was to bow to Haman when he came into their presence. Even all the other rulers in all the other provinces, when Haman showed up, they were to bow to him. All the servants of the temple, or all the servants of the guard in the citadel around the city, everyone's supposed to bow to him. There's one guy who refused to, though. Mordecai. Refused to bow to Haman. Refused to give space.
Calling me Gannat?
No. The G is silent. Anyway. And Haman, it just rubbed him the wrong way. He was so mad and so egotistical that he had nothing good to say about Mordecai. And so the king, there's a plot to kill the king. And Mordecai hears about it, tells Esther. Esther tells the king. It saves the king's life. Wrote it down. Goes on. Mordecai won't bow to Haman. So Haman gets mad. Builds a gallows at his house that are 50 cubits tall. That's 75 feet, by the way. A cubit, 18 inches. So if it's 50 cubits, it's 75 feet tall. That's how tall these gallows are. Now, that means one of two things. Either like hangman nooses or sharp poles to like impale them on, which much more Persian. Throw them off a high place, impaled by a pole.
Perfect.
And Haman gets so mad, he convinces the king that there's a group of people that are out, that are plotted to kill him and overthrow his throne. And it is the Jewish people and that their leader is Mordecai. So, Purim, lots, the king asked Haman what he should do about it, empowers him to do what he wants to about it. So Haman casts lots. Yes. Yes, he is. Yes. He's already been named. Yes. No idea. Because he wanted to kill his whole family.
Well, it does say that he disdained, in chapter 3, verse 6, he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Because at this point in Persia, like Kirk was saying earlier, there were how many million?
There were 6 million
6
total.
million, only 250,000 had left.
So there's still nearly 6 million. There's 5,750,000 or so Jews still
in Persia.
In Persia.
So the truth really was, and same thing in Egypt, they could have overthrown everything, they just didn't know it.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to get to that too. No. We're going to get to that. We'll get to that. Yes.
We're not there yet.
Yes. Yes, he has. He has. So Mordecai saved him.
And Esther told the king in Mordecai's name,
and then,
hey, this is going to happen.
Haman convinces the king that Mordecai is a threat against him. And he casts lots. And the lots leads him to the 13th day of Adar. So
and you have to see that. It says that whenever Esther was, I don't know if she was given a full year, but Esther was introduced to him the 7th year of the king's reign. Yeah. But it says a little bit later on, it's like the 12th year or something of his reign. So
5 years
he saves his life, and 5 years pass, and then that's when.
So it wasn't just like a couple nights, like it was in VeggieTales.
Yes, you're gonna. It was no. So 5 years have passed, something like that. So of course he's forgotten.
Yes.
Lots of things have happened since then.
And so the king is convinced that Mordecai and the Jewish people are after his throne. Now, why doesn't he immediately have a problem with his queen? Why doesn't he immediately recognize
Because she never told them.
She has been sworn to not tell them. So her name's not Hadassah, it's Esther.
Mm-hmm.
But her heritage is Hadassah.
Right.
Now, so the lots that Haman cast fall on the 13th day of Adar. And so the declaration that the signet ring of the king that's on Haman's hand that seals the proclamation to all the provinces says that on the 13th day of Adar, all these Jewish people are going to die.
Yeah, in one day.
One day. All of them dead.
And that they should be ready for that day.
They should be ready for that day. Start making preparation. And Haman comes to Esther and says, hey, you've got to do something. And Esther says,
Mordecai comes to.
Yeah, Mordecai comes to Esther and says, hey, you've got to do something about this. You're the only person who can. And Esther says, it's been over 30 days. It's been a long time. It's been more than 30 days since she's even seen the king. So he hasn't summoned her or called for her in over a month. So she doesn't feel like she can just walk in there. She says, you know the penalty for coming into the presence of the king unannounced? And Mordecai quotes or insinuates, it's not Leviticus, the book of Numbers, when he says, whether you choose to do nothing or do something, it's on you. If you choose to do nothing and your people die, or you choose to speak up and your people die, you have to live with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so she fasts for 3 days and says, I'm going to go talk to the king. Tells Mordecai, I'm going to go talk to the king, but you and all of our people need to fast in preparation for me to go do this.
Yeah. And she said that she would get her maids to do it with her.
So she gets everything ready for a feast because she has to be shrewd and intelligent here. You can't just go, hey, king, this guy's trying to kill me and my people, and I'm Jewish. Because what happens when a signet ring declaration of the king is made?
It will be done.
It can't be undone.
Right.
So she's got to be smart about this. So when she walks in, she gets all dressed up and nice and has everything ready for a feast. And she goes and stands in the outer courts and waits for the king to see her.
Right. Because his throne faces the door.
When Xerxes sees her and she has come unannounced, he picks up his scepter and points it at her. So then she has the ability to approach the throne and touches the scepter, and he says, my queen, who's found favor, ask me for anything up to half my kingdom. And she says,
if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him.
Why didn't she just ask for him to save her? To destroy Haman and protect her?
I don't know.
Because you got to be wise as a serpent. So now you're King Xerxes. And the queen's come to you and said, hey, I've got something really important I want to ask of you, but I need you and Haman to be there.
Why?
Well, why does Haman need to be there?
Mm-hmm.
What is this? So, wheels start turning.
Right.
You're going to ask me something really important. I mean, I've offered you up to half my kingdom, so you can ask me for anything, but Haman has to be here? What is this? What is happening here? So he comes to the feast. When they've had dinner, or banquet, when they've had dinner, everything's over.
She asks him to dinner again.
He says,
I'll give.
hey, this is really
kingdom.
nice. I'll give you anything, half my kingdom. What do you want?
Well, come to the banquet I've prepared for tomorrow.
Come to the banquet, you and
Haman. Yep.
Haman come to the banquet tomorrow. So now
the king's wheels are turning, but Haman's feeling a little, his feathers are getting fluffed.
Haman's like, whew,
I'm really important.
I am really important.
Mm-hmm.
And the king is now going home going, what could she want? And why is
so I
Haman
wonder if
have
that's
to,
why he couldn't sleep.
why does Haman have to be involved in all this? What is going on here?
Yeah.
And your immediate expectation in this culture is what?
I don't know. I was reading.
What would your expectation, like what do you think's going through the king's mind? Like why is Haman here? If Haman is here and needs to come back again, is there something going on between Haman and my queen? And he's struggling, and he's like, I can't sleep. Bring me the book of record. Read me what happened not 3 days ago, but 5 years ago.
And how?
And somehow they got to.
No, it's after. I found. Mm-hmm.
On that night, the king could not sleep, but he gave orders. This is chapter 6, verse 1. He gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold and who had sought to lay hands on King Xerxes. And the king said, "What honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?"
Okay, pause. Did he not register that Mordecai was the name that Haman had told him?
No, he's stressing out about his wife, about Queen.
He obviously has too much on his plate. If
Well, you got
He's not-
127 provinces. A lot of
he's
names
got a lot
going
on his
through.
plate, I guess. Okay.
And in this time, Haman has left, gone by Mordecai. Mordecai didn't bow to him. He got mad, gathered all of his family. Haman gathers all of his family together, tells them all the deeds that he's done and how Mordecai has treated him. And now he's going to get Mordecai killed, and he's ready to do it right now.
He builds the gallows.
He's already got the gallows built.
Well, it says he had the gallows made.
And now he's going to the king. He's like, "Give me Mordecai now. I'll stop this uprising." But when he shows up, the king says, Hey, there's this really important guy that I want to honor."
He says, Haman came in and the king asked him, "What shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?"
Well, who would he want
Obviously, he wants to honor me.
Yeah, he's already told the whole kingdom that they have to bow to me just as well as they have to bow to the king. So who else could he be talking about? Tells him this whole...
Let a royal robe be brought. This is verse 8. Which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden.
Which the king has worn. Treat him like he is the king.
Which has a royal crest placed on its head. Then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor. Then parade him on horseback through the city square and proclaim before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robe and the horse as you have suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew who sits within the king's gate. Leave nothing undone of all that you have spoken." That's so funny. So Haman took the robe. Could you imagine his face?
That
He
backfired.
had been so upset.
Yes, king.
Took the robe and the horse, arrayed Mordecai, and led him on a horseback through the city square, and proclaimed before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Afterward, Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him, his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him."
Yeah.
So while they're still talking to them, because obviously this has gone on all night long,
Yeah.
then the eunuchs come
And
to
they
bring Haman to the
grab
banquet.
Haman. They're like, hey, you've got somewhere to be right now.
Had to go to the banquet with Esther and the king.
Yeah. So he's brought in. Esther still having to be as shrewd and wise and subtle as possible. Brings the king and Haman, who's exhausted and emotional and about to break, and the king, who is not well rested and stressed, has a banquet for them.
Who already probably has wheels turning about
King
Haman anyway.
still says, "Hey, I'll give you anything you want up to half my kingdom. Just tell me what you want. Stop making me guess and go through these mind games." And she says,
"If I found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss." So King Xerxes answered and said to Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing?" And Esther said, "The adversary and enemy is the wicked Haman." So Haman was terrified before the king and queen.
and the king got mad because he just realized, I made a proclamation, and it's going to kill my queen and nearly 6 million people, including this guy who I just honored. And he leaves the room, fuming mad, because a proclamation from the king with his seal and signet ring on it can't be undone. So now here he is, stuck. as a king. I can't make myself look foolish and throw away an edict that I just made. And I can't rewrite it, and then I'll look like I'm unstable and invite adversaries. And so he calms down a little bit and comes back into the room. And as he comes back into the room, what Haman is doing is he's coming to Esther to beg her for help to not do this. And what the king sees is him lunging after her. And he says,
will he also assault the queen while I am in the house?
So he says, seize him.
Mm-hmm.
And the guards are like, hey, he's got some gallows freshly built over at his place.
He made for Mordecai.
We could probably use them. And they use it on him and all 10 of his sons.
I didn't realize that.
His whole house is destroyed. So the king does something extremely self-preserving. And he gives the queen, he gives her a signet ring to give to anyone that she wants, and says, you decide how this works out. And she gives that signet ring to Mordecai.
And Mordecai is appointed over the house of Haman.
And he gets Haman's house and all his stuff. But Haman's fall and death does not equal the Jews' salvation. Because what has changed now at the end of the night? Outside of Haman's dead and the signet ring that was on Haman's hand is now
on Mordecai's.
On
Nothing
Mordecai's
has
hands.
changed. I mean, the
Nothing.
proclamation is still there.
The 13th of Adar is still coming.
Right.
And the responsibility of what to do is now in the hands of Esther and Mordecai. And what happens if Esther and Mordecai write a declaration that cancels the old declaration and makes the king look either weak or feeble or double-minded? What happens to Esther and Mordecai?
They're gone too.
They probably die. You don't disrespect the king. So they have to figure out a way to protect their people and be wise enough to protect the king and his honor and integrity as well. So how do they do it?
Well, she just begged him to revoke it.
But he didn't revoke it. He just gave them power.
He just said he gave them permission to write the letter.
So what did they write? They said the judgment's coming on the 13th of Adar.
So
let the Jews be able to take up arms and defend themselves. And if you want to fight them, have at it.
By these letters, the king permitted the Jews who were, this is verse 11 in chapter 8.
Yep.
Who were in every city to gather together and protect their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the forces of any people or province that would assault them, both little children and women, and to plunder their possessions. On one day in all the provinces of King Xerxes, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province and published for all people, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers who rode on royal horses went out, hastened and pressed on by the king's command, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. So Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Susa rejoiced and was glad.
So
the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday.
A Purim.
And then it says that many of the people of the land became Jews because fear of the Jews fell upon them.
So
Wow.
Purim was instituted by Mordecai.
Mm-hmm.
And so they celebrated the day after their deliverance, the 14th day of Adar. For the people who are in and around Susa, they learned of it and were protected the 14th day of Adar. So that's why they celebrate the 14th day of Adar, which this year was March 23rd and 24th, I think. And those who are further out, it was the 14th and 15th when they heard. So it ends up being a 2-day celebration for them.
They didn't hang, by the way, they didn't hang his sons.
Oh, really?
Well, it says in chapter 9 that,
The Jewish tradition says that they did.
well, it just says in chapter 9, verse 6, and in Susa, the citadel, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. Also, these names I'm not going to pronounce. And then verse 10, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of whatever her name is, the enemy of the Jews, they killed, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder.
So the 10 sons were all killed.
They were killed, but they weren't hanged at the time.
So there are two other associations with Purim. On the day of Purim in 46, Nuremberg trials, there were 10, well, there were actually 11 leaders of the Nazi party that were killed for their crimes, but the 11th committed suicide the night before. So the 10 chief generals to Hitler were all executed during Purim in 1946. In 1953, Joseph Stalin was going to round up all of the Jews in all of the Soviet Union and have them all executed. And the night before Purim began, he had a stroke. And 3 days later, he died. And the Jews were saved.
Wow.
Anyway. Yeah. Yes.
It says that in, what did you say, verse 11?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But in verse 13, it goes back and says, Esther asked the king to let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. So which one did the Jews kill them on that day?
They were hung. So the Jewish tradition says that they were hanged on those gallows. Even if they were already dead, they were hung from those gallows.
So they were killed twice, apparently. However that looks.
Double dead.
Double dead.
Double dead family of Haman. But the Jews for Purim are celebrating their protection from annihilation, their
That's
deliverance
really cool.
from annihilation, in a book that doesn't mention God by name.
Yep.
And so,
And I think it's interesting that the Jews have gone and they've defended themselves from anybody that rose up against them.
and got all their stuff.
Got all the plunder.
Sounds
then
like,
I
a
think
lot
it's-
like Egypt.
Yeah, and then I think it's interesting because it talks about how on that day, in verse 11, on that day the number of those who were killed in Susa, the citadel, was brought to the king. So they come to the king and say, hey, all of this has happened by the Jews. And the king says to Queen Esther, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men in Susa and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your position? It shall be granted to you. Or what is your further request? It shall be done. Which I think is so interesting. It's like, well, this is what they've done. I mean, if they want to go ahead.
Yeah,
do you
this
think?
is
What
what,
do you think?
yeah, in the ESV it says, now what is your wish? It shall be granted you. And what further is your request? It shall be fulfilled.
She says, let it be granted to the Jews who are in Susa to do again tomorrow, according to today's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows.
Yeah. The Jews who were in Susa gathered also on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they killed 300 men in Susa, but they laid no hands on their plunder.
They killed 75,000 of their enemies.
Yeah. They gathered to defend their lives. That's what they were granted to do. A lot more violent than the story of the VeggieTale variety.
Oh, because it's the land of eternal.
No one went
the
to
land of
the-
eternal tickling.
Yeah, perpetual tickling.
Perpetual tickling. That's
The
what it was.
island of perpetual tickling.
Well, whatever. Okay, eternal tickling.
The guy with the feather.
Constantly tickling. Oh no, not the island of perpetual tickling. Anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway. Man, this is.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot more violent and risque than the story you've probably thought you knew.
Well, that's because I've only really known the VeggieTales version, honestly.
Well,
I
this-
have read. I mean, I have highlights in the Book of Esther. I've read it for sure.
it's quite a story.
It is definitely quite the story.
So, therefore they called these days Purim.
Where was this? No, verse what?
Verse
He said
28
verse, and then
of
he just
chapter
started
9.
reading.
Therefore
Wow.
they called these days Purim after the term pur. Therefore, because of all that was written in this letter and what they had faced in this matter and what had happened to them, the Jews firmly obligated themselves and their offspring and all who joined them that without fail they would keep these 2 days according to what was written and at the time appointed every year, that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation in every clan, province, and city, and that these days of Purim should never fall into disuse among the Jews, nor should the commemoration of those days cease among their descendants. This is why they celebrate Purim.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Yes. Well, because they would still be in a province of Persia. Yeah. Jerusalem and Judea and all of Israel, like what was Israel, would still be under the jurisdiction, firmly in the jurisdiction, completely surrounded by Persian influence and Persian control. So they were still under a Persian governor and Persian rule. So they could have all gone home and defended themselves in one place. But really, that's the point of the story, is like, even under the threat of persecution, instead of tucking tail and hiding altogether, God has given us purpose and ability to be fighters and warriors for his name's sake, even in the midst of persecution and in the space that we find ourselves in, even if it's not home, which would be truly exact for where we're at, right? So our home is heaven as followers of Christ. And so God has called us to stand out and to stand our ground and to be ready to defend the truth of the gospel, even if it costs us our life, because it doesn't say, but it would be impossible to imagine that this happened and no Jewish people lost their life. You know what I mean? And so there are some who are going to lose their life in this process. There's some that are probably even going to lose their livelihoods in this process. But the willingness to remain faithful and allow even those who are far from the promise to go, hey, I want to fight that fight too and be adopted in. That's what's really impressive about this particular story, because it talks about how many of their enemies they defeated, but how many of their enemies or people who were ambivalent as it became between the Persians and Jews that said, hey, I want to grow to be I want to be a Jew now, you know?